Due to my unlikely path as an orthopedic surgeon who started a shoe company out of her garage and took that company to 40 million in 10 years, I've often been asked, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? Well, I think it starts with having good DNA. There is a gene that codes for a dopamine receptor that allows people to tolerate risk better. In human migration studies, researchers have found that those who have traveled furthest away from their home had a higher prevalence of a form of this gene called DR4-7. Those who stayed behind had the more common form called DR-4. What DR4-7 codes for is the amino acid chain that's inside the dopamine receptor complex, and it repeats 7 times rather than the 4 times that you have with DR-4. So the increased amino acid chain blunts the effect of the neurotransmitter dopamine. So what does all this mean? Well, frankly, it means it takes 3 times the amount of dopamine to excite my brain. So I have a much higher tolerance for risk and anxiety and fear. I also get bored easily. And what has happened in the US as a nation is that we have self-selected for these immigrants and therefore the entrepreneurs, and we have such a great entrepreneurial country because of that. And we have these people who are on the edge of the herd, these mavericks out there to push to new frontiers. Now, my own DNA came from my parents who were not only immigrants once, but twice. From North Vietnam to South Vietnam, from the South Vietnam to the US at the end of the Vietnam War. My father risked his life and traveled in a bus from the US Embassy to the airport on the floor in the final days of the war. He then had a woman's blouse on and a woman's hat and carried my 2 sisters along the tarmac in a very dangerous walk to board that plane. In the meantime, I was 7 and totally excited that we were going to America. And even when I heard the machine guns start to fire as we took off, it still didn't frighten me. Our family are people of adventurers and risk takers. My youngest sister is an entrepreneur as well. My 3rd sister has lived all over the world in service to UNICEF. And only one second sister stayed in the Seattle suburbs to be an OBGYN. So what if you don't have this DNA? What can you do to be a good entrepreneur? Well, you must have resourcefulness. Because as a startup founder, you never have enough resources, and you don't know the clear path to your destination. So you must always be opportunistic and flexible. I was taught this at an early age. So once we escaped from Vietnam, and we ended up on Wake Island, and there we were asked, where would you like to go? Which refugee camp in the US? My father said Camp Pendleton because he actually had some friends and distant relatives in California who could help him. So after many, many hours of traveling and crossing the Pacific Ocean, the plane finally landed, and we were so ecstatic when the plane door opened, until we found out we were in Arkansas. So I would challenge any of you today to find a stranger in Arkansas who's willing to sign and say that they'd be financially responsible for you. This is what my father faced in 1975. So what he did was he went to the phone booth and he started cold calling physicians in the Yellow Pages because he thought one physician would help another. Luckily, one of his calls to a doctor's office, because when was the last time you actually got a doctor in a doctor's office, the wife of the doctor answered the phone because she ran his office, and she said, I will call you back tomorrow after I've had a chance to discuss this with my husband. That was great news, except for he was at a phone booth in a refugee camp. So the next day he had to fend people off, convince them to keep their conversation short in hopes that the call would come. And indeed, Dr. and Mrs. Koenig did sponsor us in 1975. And I'd like to pause to make a comment that the United States is not only full of entrepreneurs, it is full of the most generous people in the world. So I learned from my experience at a very young age to be resourceful. And in 9th grade, I made the cheerleading team, and I was so excited because I was the biggest geek, and I wanted to be popular and wear the short skirts. You see in the picture, I'm wearing a short skirt. So I came home so excited to tell my parents, and my dad said, absolutely not. You are not standing on the sidelines and cheering for others when you can participate in a sport. So I'm like, well, how am I supposed to wear the short skirt and play a sport? And then I reimagined my possibilities and said, tennis. They wear cute short skirts. The problem was I'd never played tennis before. So I went to the high school tennis coach and I pitched him on me being his assistant in exchange for borrowing a racket, some lessons after practice, and rides home after school because my mother wasn't going to pick me up. Then I practiced all summer long in the middle of the Missouri heat because I thought that would make me so much stronger when the season started again. And indeed, in 3 years, I did make it to the state championship in California. But what this story tells about are the components of resourcefulness that even a youngster can have. So in a time of necessity, I was creative. And then in order to execute on my new, reimagined possibilities, I practiced, I studied, I focused on my area of focus. And then, of course, there was just relentless persistence. Another component of resourcefulness that's so important is networking. When I started as an orthopedic surgeon and I wanted to start a shoe company, I didn't know anyone in the shoe industry. But I was a really good shopper. You know, ortho was very stressful. I needed a lot of retail therapy. So I called my salesperson/therapist at Barney's and I said, hey, you know those 2 guys that are always visiting you from Italy every August? Do you think they might know someone in the shoe industry? Well, as luck would have it, one owned a shoe factory and the other one owned a tannery. So within weeks, I had set up a meeting to meet friends of a friend who eventually helped me with my first collection. But even getting to Milan to meet these guys required resourcefulness. Because when I called the travel agent to book the trip, she laughed and said, you have got to be the Pope to get a room during this time. There's the fashion shows, the car show, the furniture show, the shoe show. Closest I can get you is 200 kilometers away. Well, this wasn't really acceptable to me, so I called up Heather from Gucci and said, Heather, can't you call headquarters? I mean, Gucci must have blocks of room somewhere in Milan. So my first stay in Milan was actually at a top-notch 5-star hotel at the Gucci corporate rate of 70% off rack. Yeah, those were days before we shopped online. So now, what I find is the next component of a successful founder, and that is love. 15 years ago, I probably would have used the word passion. And you often hear entrepreneurs having passion, and we do, we must have it. But passion describes more of the intensity of your feelings. But having been through personal experience and growth, of having 3 children, of reuniting with the love of my life, I know now that what I was experiencing with my company was I was loving my company. Because just as I wouldn't abandon my children, I wouldn't abandon my company, even though there were dark times, even though there were moments when I didn't have any answers, when it felt so uncomfortable and all I wanted to do was quit. And it was so daunting. And just as you would be with someone you love, I approached my company with absolute vulnerability, which means that I acted without any guarantees. I invested time and money without knowing if it will actually work. And yet, I approached it with courage. And what I mean by that is that courage comes from the Latin word cor, the heart. It was my inner strength and my heartfelt love for what I was doing that carried me through, and also the authenticity in my message that resonated so well with my customers. Related to courage is bravery, but I find it is slightly different. Bravery is about overcoming your fears and then being daring with an intrepid boldness, because I heard a lot of no's. I heard a lot of impossible, can'ts, price too low, price too high, whatever it was. But I still had to go down the path, even though at times I was lonely at the top. I was also very lucky. You think you can get lucky? Well, research shows that you can actually get more lucky. Dr. Richard Wiseman spent a decade studying this topic, and he wrote a book called The Lucky Factor. And what he found was that lucky people had a different mindset. They thought they were lucky. So they were in the right place at the right time, in the right frame of mind. And his subjects actually were able to increase their luck, and 80% of them did, and some of them only took a month to show a 40% increase in luck. So whether you're lucky or you're an entrepreneur, you always need to be creative and be vigilant and on the lookout for the random opportunities that may arise in your life. Such as in 2001, I was really lucky and I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which took me, by the way, from 8 million in sales to 16 million in 12 months. Now, I had pitched to be on her show, but that wasn't how I ended up on her show. What happened was her producer saw me on a show that I did called Radical Sabbatical. It was on a minor network. Nobody saw it except for this producer. And the story was very much in fitting with the show that they were doing about people who were chasing their dreams. So I had Oprah on national TV saying, quote, "Taryn, you make great shoes," on a show that had nothing to do about shoes. It was about making dreams come true. So that illustrates the elements of how you can be luckier. Get out there and network. Talk about your dreams. Talk about your projects. Talk about yourself. Network with the people. And practice being in that state of mind. Do the small shows that you think no one's ever going to see. Talk to the junior reporter. Talk to the admin that is waiting to answer your calls. And first and foremost, smile at people, because people are opportunities. And if you smile at them, perhaps luck will smile on you. The other necessary component of being an entrepreneur these days is technology. During the 10 years that I built the company, I also have 3 children. So while I thought I could have it all, I didn't have time for it all. And I'm ever so grateful for the BlackBerry, which my daughter used to call the Blueberry, because it made me as productive at her ballet recital as if I was in the office. And just today, I was FaceTiming her and booking my flight back to LA and having Siri text my partner all at the same time. And I do believe that technology will continue to improve, in particular, women's lives, to improve our productivity and efficiency. Imagine a world where our fashion accessories can monitor our health. Imagine a world where we have a network connecting people and products so that you see a woman walking down the street and you can buy her dress if you like it. That and a comfortable pair of stilettos, and we do have it all. So I was pretty well formed by 5 years old with my DNA. But I spent 40 years building more resourcefulness, learning how to love, becoming braver, getting lucky, and using technology to improve my life. And I stand here today, a serial entrepreneur, ready to launch again.